Hey guys, thanks for joining Learn to Play. My name is Lance, and today we're going to go ahead and take a look at Dungeon Saga, which is Mantic's brand new dungeon crawling game. It's a 2 to 5 player game where one player will control the Overlord or Dungeon Master, and 1 to 4 players will play as the various heroes. Games typically last anywhere from a half an hour up to 2 hours, depending upon the objectives and the skill level of the players playing. So let's head to the table and I'll teach you how to play. Alright, so I'd like to go over the Necromancer Overlord panel real quick. So on the side here, it's going to list the various enemies that the Overlord has at his disposal. And then it lists each enemy's movement, a number of dice that they're going to throw during combat, and their defensive values. We also have any special notes or special rules that accompany particular models, and those are listed at the bottom for clarification. And then we also have the hit chart. So as the heroes do damage to the enemies, based on the number of hits that they do, there's various effects. So like if we look at the skeletons, 1 hit does not do anything. 2 hits would reduce them to a bone pile, and then 3 and 4 hits would destroy them and you would remove the model completely. Alright, so real quick, the Overlord is going to choose an adventure for the heroes to go on. He's going to go ahead and read the story to the heroes to set the mood. If the heroes have any special cards or things that they need to take, it'll list it here. The Overlord will list the number of command cards that he will build his deck out of. So in this case we have 12. It lists the number of commands per turn that the Overlord will have. His raised dead limits, so we can have a maximum of 4 warriors out and 2 archers. And then any victory conditions for the heroes and the Overlord. On the other side, it's going to show a picture of the dungeon that the Overlord is going to build. He will lay out all the tiles except for the tiles that are blocked by doors. Those are hidden to the heroes until they've opened those doors, and then those tiles will be laid out. It also lists the monsters that you're going to put out, as well as their facing, any bone piles that need to be placed, as well as any furniture, doors, etc. And then it also lists the color of the door and what type of lock it has. So, for example, this door is a strength test door, and then we have magical ward lock chest, and as well as a door down here. So you'll put out tokens to represent those as well. And then we are ready to start our adventure. Alright, so we're all set up and ready to play. So the last thing the Overlord is going to need to do before the game starts is to grab his Overlord deck and take the top 12 cards out of it that are detailed in the particular mission. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The rest of the cards will go back into the box. We won't need those for this game. And then he'll take the top 3 to be in his hands at the beginning of the game, and the rest will make up his draw pile. So at this point, the Overlord can look at those cards, and normally you'd keep them hidden. But for our game, we're going to go ahead and put them out so that we can see them. And then we're ready to start. So Dungeon Saga is played in a number of rounds. Each round consists of the hero phase, the Overlord phase, and then the end of turn phase. So let's get started. Alright, so Dungeon Saga is played in a number of rounds. Each round consists of the hero turns, the Overlord turn, and the end of round turn. So during the hero's turn, each hero will have the opportunity to go based on how the players want to play them. And during each hero's turn, they may move and then perform one action, whether it's an attack or an activation or interaction. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the dwarf and start his turn. So he can move up to 6 spaces, and his movement can be in any direction, including diagonal. So he can move diagonal as long as one of the spaces that he's trying to move into is a legal space. So if we were moving here, then either this space or this space he would have to be able to move in legally in order to move diagonally. If both of those spaces are blocked, then he could not move into the diagonal space. Alright, so let's go towards this skeleton over here, which will put us 6 spaces in, which is his movement. Now, Every model has a front arc, which is the space to the left and right, and the 3 spaces in the middle, and then a rear arc, which consists of the 3 spaces behind the model. Now, once the dwarf moved into the skeleton's front arc, he had to stop, whether he had movement left or not. Alright, so at the end of the dwarf's movement, he can change his facing to face any direction he likes. So we have him facing this way so that his rear arc is not exposed. A couple other things to note during the hero's movement. Heroes cannot move through other models, friend or enemy. Heroes cannot move through or onto furniture. Heroes can end their turn and move through bone piles, and if they do so, if they end their turn on a bone pile, then the necromancer cannot raise a skeleton from that bone pile. Alright, so now let's take a look at Breakaway since we have the dwarf and the skeleton together. So during the start of a model's turn, if it lies in the front arc of an enemy, it can still move away, but there's a couple rules that govern that. So first, the model must be able to move into a space that is not in an enemy's front arc. And then before it moves, for every enemy that it lies in that enemy's front arc, that enemy will get to do a free strike against that model. So, for example, if the dwarf moves into this space, before he moves into there, the skeleton archer will get to take a free strike at him. And if, say, like this guy was here as well, then he would be able to make a free strike against the dwarf as well. Now, if this enemy was here, then the dwarf would not be able to move because no matter where he moved into, he would lie in an enemy's front arc. And as far as a free strike goes, it's simply just a combat attack. The dwarf would be able to get to roll his defensive dice, and the skeletons would roll their attacking dice. Alright, so now that we're done with the dwarf's movement, let's go ahead and make an attack with him as the second part of his activation. So we're going to go ahead and attack the skeleton archer. So with the dwarf, we're going to look at his combat dice. So he's going to get 4. And then we're going to go ahead and look at the skeleton warrior's combat dice, which is a 2. And then before we roll, we're going to check modifiers. So if the dwarf is injured, he would lose a dice, which he's not. He's got full health. Minions never get injured, so we don't have to worry about the minion. There's -1 dice if either one of them is outnumbered, which they're not. And then it would be -1 dice for the defender if the dwarf was in his rear arc, which he's not. Now, a thing to keep in mind is that a defender or any model will never roll lower than 2 dice. So if modifiers would bring them lower than 2 dice, they would stay with their 2 dice, and then the next thing that would be modified is their armor, which can only go down to 1. After that, anything extra would be discarded. Alright, so let's go ahead and roll the dice and see what happens. Okay, so with the attacker being the dwarf, we have to compare his dice to the skeleton's armor, which is a 2. So any dice that are 2 or less will be discarded, so this 2 will get erased. And then we match up the dice, and for every dice that the dwarf rolls over the skeleton, his defense will cause 1 wound. So the skeleton blocks that one because they're even, and the skeleton beat the dwarf's 4 on that one, so those are even. So the dwarf only gets 1 hit through, and then if we consult the necromancer's chart for skeleton warrior, 1 hit has no effect. So the skeleton doesn't take any damage, and everything is okay. So this dwarf's attack has failed. Alright, so the next hero we're going to go ahead and activate is the Elven Ranger. So he gets a movement of 8, so we're going to move him up 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, and stop there, because he's got plenty of range with his shooting. And then we're going to go ahead and make a shot with him. So we check him on his combat, and it lists that he has long range. So we'll grab the long range marker and check to make sure that he has range to his model. So we measure anywhere from his square to the enemy's square, which he does. And then we check line of sight, which is a straight line from any point of his base to any point of the enemy's base, which he does as well. And then we go ahead and grab his dice, so he'll get 4 dice for his shooting attack. And then yet again, the skeleton will receive 2 dice. We check modifiers. So it'll be -1 if either model is injured, which he's not. And then it's -1 for the defender if he is in the defender's rear arc, which he's not. And then the last thing is that he would receive -1 dice if he crosses any piece of furniture, except for a bookcase. Bookcase would completely block line of sight. So he does cross one. Now the only way he can prevent that is if he happened to be adjacent to that piece of furniture. So he will lose 1 dice for being across from the furniture, and then we'll go ahead and roll our combat and see what happens. Alright, so all 3 of those were hits. So then we compare dice. So we have the 5 will score a hit for the ranger, the 4 will score a hit for the ranger, and then the 3 gets through as well. So we've done 3 hits to the skeleton. So if we check his chart again for the skeleton warrior, taking 3 hits, the model is destroyed and removed. So this guy has been completely destroyed. Alright, so the Overlord, seeing that the heroes are having way too much fun, decides that he's going to play his interrupt card, which he can do anytime after the first hero each turn is gone and before the last hero in the turn is gone. And he can play an interrupt. He cannot play 2 interrupt in a row unless there is a hero that has gone in between those interrupts. So this one will let him activate 1 model. So he's going to activate this skeleton, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces he can move, and then he's going to go ahead and attack the ranger. So first off, the skeleton will get 2 dice. And then the ranger will refer to his combat dice and not the shooting dice for his defense, so he'll get 3 dice. And there aren't any modifiers that are going to modify this, so we're going to go ahead and roll the dice. And so neither one of the skeleton warrior's dice were able to penetrate the elf's armor, so we don't even need to check anything else. And so then that will end that interrupt that the Overlord played. So then we can move on to the next hero. Alright, so the next hero we're going to activate is Denor, the human wizard. So we're going to go ahead and move him. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have to stop there because we've moved into the skeleton's front arc. And then we're going to go ahead and cast a spell with him. Now, the wizard can cast either 1 major spell or 2 minor spells. But we need to get rid of this skeleton, so we're going to go ahead and cast Burn, which is a major spell. Then we're going to check to make sure if we need line of sight or not, which we don't. With this spell, we get 4 dice, and the skeleton will get his 2 defensive dice as usual. And like I said, we do need to get rid of the skeleton, so the wizard is going to go ahead and burn one of his energy crystals, which gives him 1 additional dice that he can roll for this spell. And normal modifiers do not affect this roll, so we're ready to go. And then just like anything else, we will remove any dice that don't succeed for the attacker penetrating the defender's defense, which is a 2, so 1s and 2s will be removed. And then we compare dice. So the first one is a tie, so that one doesn't count. The second one, Denor does 1 damage, and then the second one he does another damage. So with 2 damage, the skeleton will be removed, but a bone pile will be placed in his place. And then the last thing we need to do is, since we've cast this spell, we check its recharging, which is a 180-degree turn. So we'll turn it there. And then at the end of the hero's turn, or at the end of the phase after the Overlord and that, at the end of the game round, then this will be turned to 90 degrees. And so it'll take 2 complete turns for it to be recharged and be able to be used again. Alright, so before we go with our last hero, the Overlord is going to step in and play his Interrupt 2 card, which will let him perform 2 actions. So the first one he's going to do is he's going to replace this bone pile with a skeleton. And then for his second action, he's going to do the same thing, but in front of them. Now, when a model springs up in front of heroes that are in their front arc, each hero can perform a free strike against that model as it's raising up. So the first one we'll do is the elf, which he will use his regular combat dice because the model is adjacent and he will not be able to use his range, so he'll get 2. or he'll get his 3 dice for combat, and then the skeleton warrior will get his 2 defense. So we'll go ahead and roll and see what happens. So 1 does not get through. And then we compare our other 2 results, which was a 6 and a 3, which will cause 2 damage, and it'll drop him back down into a bone pile. And then that is done. Alright, so that concludes the Overlord's interrupt. Alright, so for our last hero to go, we have the human barbarian, Orloff. So he's going to go ahead and move up, and he's going to go ahead and attack the skeleton warrior. So he's going to get his 5 dice, and our skeleton warrior will get his 2. And then we'll check modifiers. So Olaf is not injured, so we're okay there. The skeleton warrior is not outnumbered because he has to have heroes in their front arcs. So we have 1 hero here that's in the front arc, but our ranger is pointing in this direction, so this is the ranger's rear arc. So there won't be any deductions there. But Olaf is in his rear arc, so he might lose 1 dice, which he can't lose and go down any more than 2. But he can lose 1 armor, so his armor will become 1. So as long as Olaf doesn't roll any 1s, all his attacks will get through. Which was really good since he rolled 3 2s. Alright, so we have 1 hit here and 1 hit here, and then all 3 of these hit, so Olaf has completely destroyed that skeleton. And that concludes the hero's turn. Alright, so we're going to cover the Overlord's turn now. So if we look at the adventure book, the Overlord is going to get 3 commands per turn. So he can spend those commands to move and activate models and to cast Raise Dead spells. He's also allowed to use 1 command card per turn, but we don't need to use that one right now. So let's go ahead and try to raise or bring a skeleton up from this pile here. So we just replaced that pile with a skeleton. So we're going to go with an archer. Once a model is raised up from Raise Dead spell, it's already counted as activated and it can't do anything else this turn. So let's go ahead and raise this one up next. And when we raise the skeleton up in front of heroes that lie in the hero's front arc, each hero is going to get a free strike on that skeleton, kind of cutting it down as it comes up. So let's go ahead and do the ranger first, and he'll get his 3 dice against the skeleton's 2. Now in this situation the skeleton is outnumbered, so it already is down to 2 dice, so it'll drop its armor down to 1. So then we compare dice, and the skeleton beat the hero on this one. Hero beat the skeleton on that one and on that one, so it'll drop back down to a pile. And let's go ahead and try to raise this one up to a skeleton as well. So with this one, both the dwarf and the mage will get to swing, so we'll try the dwarf first. And the dwarf hits with all of them. So comparing the dice, the dwarf has beat the skeleton 4 times. So the skeleton will be destroyed on that one. And that'll conclude the Overlord's turn. Alright, so the last phase in the turn is the end of turn phase. The Overlord will get to draw 1 card from his Overlord deck to add to his hands. And then if the hero wizard or the Overlord himself has cast any spells, this is the time where they'll get recharged and turned clockwise 90 degrees. And if the ends of the game conditions have not been met, then we move into the next turn and start with the heroes again. Alright, so for injuring heroes and bosses during combat, a hero and a boss may only ever receive 1 wound no matter how many hits are rolled during that combat. And then for heroes and bosses, if they receive 5 wounds, they will be crippled. For bosses, they'll be removed from the game. Alright, so real quick, I'd like to go over the 2 different types of locks that you may see on doors and chests. So for the first one, it's a strength test. And so the hero will roll his combat dice as usual, and the door itself will roll 3 defensive dice, and the dwarf's armor is a 3, and it'll work just like any other combat. So, for example, if we have the barbarian hitting it, he gets his 5 dice against the dwarf's 3 dice, and then you would just roll that normally with no modifiers affecting it. As far as the magical wards, those can only be unlocked by the wizard, and there are certain spells that will reduce that ward. So, like for the wizard, we have the one called Break Ward, and it'll reduce the ward by 1 each time it's cast. So you'd have to cast a spell twice to open up that ward and unlock that chest.